while we're doing the Saturday Night Live, or whatever show we're on at the moment, the ethical side of it. So you're getting responses that have been written in a certain way, especially when you have a conversation. But what cultural and ethical background is being used to generate those responses? And that would be a great thing for a philosophy class or an ethical class at the higher level in education to kick around. You know, who's making these decisions to give you those responses?
The Better Mindset Podcast.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to our recorded conversation called GPT is Freaking Me Out, Teacher Edition. Did you like that, everybody? That was my little, my little title. So we have got 4 of our UTB team members on the call, and we're exploring what ChatGPT or the future of AI could mean for us in education. Now, it's worth mentioning that none of us are AI experts, definitely not, but we're all experienced educators and teachers, just like most of you, and we're really interested today to have a look into what the opportunities could be for us in our schools and classrooms. And on the call, we've got Bex, Paul, and Adrian. Hey, everybody.
Hello. Hello.
I was just wondering, everybody, if we could start with a quick explanation of what GPT is. And I know, Adrian, you've done a little bit of research and you've actually got ChatGPT to tell us what it actually is itself. So how about you start with that? Give us a basic layman's terms. Remember, we're all educators. We're all coming at it from a non-technical point of view.
Yeah, so very, very low level entry. So basically, what ChatGPT is, it's been around for maybe a couple of months, and it's just gone live just before Christmas. So people were kind of getting excited about it, and have now been jumping it. So you would have seen it pop up around social media and things. And there's kind of this idea of, oh my goodness, what this is going to do and disrupt what we were at. So what actually is it? It's actually an AI model that takes the text that you enter, then has a look at a whole lot of other text that it's got access to, analyzes what you ask, and then gives you a response. So it's actually using computer, it's neurological kind of nerdy stuff in the back end to make those answers come out to you. It's not a search engine that goes and finds something. It goes and looks at everything that's been written that's out there published publicly in the web, and then formulates an answer based on the question that you asked it. So really, in simple terms, it's a computer program that can understand what you type in, and it can respond in a text-like manner like humans. And it analyzes a large amount of text to be able to give you that answer and then generates those responses. And as it goes, it gets better and better because it learns what it's doing. And behind it are not just a machine that's doing it, there's engineers in behind it that are actually not controlling it, but actually building the code and helping it learn better, and adding in a whole lot of safeguards and ethics and things like that. So it's quite an interesting little model, and it's getting better as it gets older.
So it's at the moment, because I think for a lot of people I've been talking to, they've been thinking that it's basically connected to the internet and it's kind of like going to replace Google and it's this big sort of search engine. That's coming further down the track, isn't it? Like that's not the way it works at the moment, but it might be in the future.
Not sure. I know that it creates, when it creates a response, it's a unique response. So that's what's scaring a few teachers a little bit at the moment, because they go, oh my goodness, we're not going to be able to track it and we can't check out the plagiarizer. So I did a test with a school last year where we got 6 teachers to ask the same question and we got 6 completely different answers. So once again, it doesn't pull up from the same stuff like a search engine would. But I think it's a nice opportunity for us to reflect on what we do in the classroom.
Yeah, I was just saying that for me, the big difference is that it is a chat, it is a conversation. So when you ask it a question and it spits out a response, then you don't have to retype the whole question again. You could say, hang on, define that bit a little bit more, and it will join in the conversation. So it's remembering the dialogue that you're chatting with and then just building upon it, and you're saving the chat or the dialogue. And so for a lot of teachers, it's a lot more natural, and it's a lot more about a conversation, or a little bit more social in its response and how you're talking to it. And I think that is probably why it's resonating with people quite a lot. It's that conversational talk that people are liking.
Yeah, I'll cut in there before we jump somewhere else, Mark. So I did one last week I asked it to write a poem about a friend of mine called Mike who was riding his bike. And it was fairly average poem. It wasn't that great. And then I said, write me a story about Mike who runs into a bunch of climate change activists. And has a nasty conflict. And so it actually put Mike back on a bike, having a journey and an experience, and then running into these activists as he went through. So it's actually grabbed what I said before, put it in the context of the next bit, and built on it to make this story quite good. I thought it was funny.
Wow.
I know. What would be some examples of ways that we've used it so far, like things that you've played around with? That might be quite good, because I guess a lot of people listening probably haven't had a jump in and had a go at it. What would be some more examples? Have anybody else got some?
Can I just crank it back a smidge, Mark, just for a smidge,
Yeah.
to talk a little bit about in schools and in education. We tend to want to change what we're doing, but we're so not stuck. We're used to doing the things that we normally do. And when something like this comes across and becomes disruptive, we automatically can throw up the arms and do the henny penny of, oh my goodness, the world is falling. This is not going to be very good for us.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that we went through school and learnt in a certain way. Our parents went through school and learnt in a certain way. We've then gone back to school to teach in that same certain way. And we haven't really altered or changed much about what we do in education. Now, we can talk about Sir Ken Robinson and what he said, and that was years ago. And we still haven't modified a lot of what we do based on some of the stuff that he was talking about maybe 10 years ago. And now we get something like this that could actually disrupt the way in which we work. Now, I'm based in Australia, and when COVID hit and we went into lockdown, schools were talking a lot about, before pre-COVID, talking a lot about, what do we do to make education more engaging with the digital world? How can we use this online environment better? How can we create personalised learning? All those kind of things. But we really didn't do anything until that impetus came to make us do it. And then when we flicked online, we found that we could actually teach online. We could change the way in which we did stuff to use technology to run engaging online lessons. We learned a lot about how that works. But now that we've flipped back into school, we've kind of gone back into those habits that we did pre-pandemic, if that makes sense. So this thing is a nice opportunity for us to reflect on what we do in schools, what the future is going to be like for our students, and how do we prepare them for that, and how can we use this tool for better learning outcomes. And that's what I want to kind of come at it at, rather than the henny penny, the sky is falling, all those kind of things. So I think that's a really valuable discussion. I don't think there's an answer. But I think there's something to probably kick around a little bit, and we can talk about as we go through, Mark, about how we can use it, what we can use it in the classroom for, and what we've kicked around, and what we found works well, and what we found doesn't work well.
Going back to my question before, what would be some of the other things that people have used or had a little experiment, like first-hand experiences that we've had? Because there's a couple that I've got, but I know, Paul, you've had to play around with it.
Yeah, so I think the two things that I think we can... Number one, I think, is one of the huge pain points in schools is that the admin kind of work that teachers are doing in regard to ticking off boxes and being able to pass into admin and all that kind of paperwork. We used to call it kind of paperwork stuff. So a couple of things that it does really well is that when we're designing tasks, so the other day I was looking at some augmented reality projects that would use a specific app, and I basically said, come up with 3 creative student projects using this app on augmented reality that were aligned to the Australian curriculum. So automatically it was spitting out these 3 kind of project-based learnings, but was definitely aligned to it. Now, the great thing about that is that saved me a lot of research, making sure that it was an authentic task, but also matched the curriculum that I had to teach. But the thing that I loved about it is, because I had a really good knowledge of what it spat out, I was then able to enhance it even more and put my flavor on it, because we never outsource work that we don't fully understand ourselves. And that is the big danger. If I was coming into a subject area and I asked it to spit it out and I have no knowledge on it, how do I critically analyze whether this is a good task or not? So it's not taking the teacher out of the equation. In fact, the teacher, I think, becomes even more important. But what you can then do is refine that task. So I think one of those really effective uses of it, Mark, would definitely be aligning the research, the kind of the work that's going to take a lot of time, but not a lot of mental kind of energy. Is that kind of way that we can utilize it really effectively? Yeah,
that's going to really change, like you were saying, change the whole process of how a teacher will approach, particularly planning and assessment and things, but it changes the whole role of the teacher in that example, like you gave, when you're coming up with, I know that I'm thinking of an example. One of our trainers, Richard, has asked it to create a lesson plan for I can't remember. It was some formula, I think some maths formula. It might have even been you, Adrian. And then it'll give you all of the bullet points and outline that whole lesson plan. But like you're saying, you can't just pick that up and then put that into the classroom and then just go straight to the teachers, straight to the learning, with the students. You have to actually be in that editing role, don't you? And you have to take your subject knowledge to that piece.
I was just going to say, not only that, but if you can add all of your experience as a teacher and implement effective pedagogy that goes with the content, that's where I think it's a really great marriage between the two, is taking your experience and everything that you've learned face to face with the kids with ChatGPT's expert knowledge of finding, the right content. Then that's a beautiful marriage, I think, between the two.
So just a couple of things that I've given it a crack at. Conscious that I'm talking a lot, so I'll make sure I stop talking in a tick. I just wanted it to write some code for me, which I've already written before, to do with just using Google Apps Script to write some script to grab a date and an event out of a spreadsheet and then drop it into a calendar and then send an email reminder to someone. And I've written all that code before, so I got it to write it for me. Now, it wrote really generally the same kind of structure that I had. It had a couple of different pieces in there that I hadn't thought of. So I went, okay, let's have a look at that works. But what it didn't pick up was a couple of things that you need to set up to make it work in your environment. So you can't just kind of cut and paste it. You can cut and paste it and build on it, exactly like what Paul was saying. Use that wisdom to make it stronger. But you've still got to know a little bit about it. Otherwise, it will fall over and it won't quite work. So when I think about it, it helps teachers do that, as Paul said, the things that kind of drive us nuts. So let's pretend you've got to write an email to a parent about their student that's been late to school and is not really going as well as they could in their results, and you're concerned about them. So sometimes those kind of emails are really hard to write. So if you put that information and said, look, design an email for me about Brenda, who's struggling at school. She started off really well. She seems to be mixing with the wrong kind of people. She's turned up late to school. I've noticed that she's not dressed that nice. All those kind of things. It will then, create an email for you with a nice flavour to it that then you can modify and edit and then send off. So that saves you a bucket of time. And that kind of, for me, that's where I'd be kind of heading down that way, just for those admin bits before we talk about how we'd use it actually in the classroom for learning.
Yeah, and you can actually ask it, you can tell it, can you write it with a friendly tone, as if I know the person reasonably well. You can even give it, and then you can just, like you were saying before, Paul, you actually, once it gives you the letter or the email, you can ask it to refine it a little bit. I've done something similar with a story. My wife's an illustrator, and we're thinking about writing some stories ourselves. So she would, author the story and then illustrate them. And I've got an idea in my head of a story that I'd quite like to write. So I just said to it, can you write a story about this character who has this problem and then he solves it at the end by doing X? And it wrote and I said within 500 words, because it's a picture book. And it wrote the story, and then I replied to it. I said, "Could you change the second scenario so that it doesn't do this, but it does that?" And it would do that as well. So,
wow,
it's kind of it's asking the question: in that scenario, and when you're writing the letter or you're crafting that, are you creating, like as an author, have I written that book? Or have I had all the inspiration ideas and I've just got someone to put the right words in the right place? I mean, that's the question that I think a lot of teachers are going to be asking. And there's two different responses. One is, I haven't written that at all. And the other response is, yeah, you've just got someone to do the driving. You're driving the car, but the engine's actually pulling you along. I don't know what you think about that.
So this is a really interesting one because it also rolls over into the AI art, where there's big discussions about who is the creators when the AI is scraping all the content off the internet and using people's work to create those magnificent pieces. And so, someone that puts in some of those prompts and then spits it out, and they're going to publish that book and actually say that they are the authors where they haven't written the text itself. That's the big, it's not ethical because it's actually very black and white. You haven't written that text, so you can't claim to be the author. But what you can do is obviously modify that to a state where it's given you an idea and you've taken that text and you've rewritten it or something like that. That may have some ground there, but simply putting in the prompts, it's like AR art. If you type in what you want to create, you can't claim that art piece as yours, and you can't copyright it, just like all the artists that put their work out that scrapes their copyright and takes their work and claim it as your own. So we've got some lots of lawsuits. There's lots of civil lawsuits at the moment with the AI art that's really interesting, where artists who have work produced that's very similar with the same techniques and styles are actually saying, you use my images to recreate that, and therefore that's against copyright. So there's a lot, I think, to play out in a legal sense, not so much with ChatGPT, but definitely the artistic world and producing works in that field.
I'm just wondering, I'm just listening to, you know, the kinds of questions that you have been asking and thinking maybe that needs to be the focus for teachers, is to those questioning techniques, problem solving, like all those things that have been quite, they've sort of come to the forefront, even just when you're doing searches and stuff. That's sort of where the teaching element comes in. What do good questions look like?
Yeah.
How do you refine a question? How do you and those are the kinds of things that teachers could be working on with their kids as well.
And I think, Bex, also what we tend to do is we tend to mark outcome. So we set a task. Like I'm an ex-maths teacher, so I've got 5 equations I need you to solve and solve them. So the students work out what variable is missing, and then they punch it into the equation and they get the answer. Now, does that actually assess that they know what they're doing, or does that assess that they know the process? So a couple of conversations I've had with teachers around this is, really let's have a look at the moment we assess outcomes. So let's have a look at that essay, that written piece, that test or whatever. We mark it against a rubric or a set of standards, and that gives us our outcome. But maybe we need to start marking process of how they actually get to that spot and the journey they take to learn, which takes a different headset from a teacher. And then maybe, just maybe, we need to teach wisdom and maybe problem solving. And then also that whole idea of curating and collecting and refining information, which is it's a higher level thinking skill than just reading a bit of text and, the dog was black and it grabbed a ball. The question is, what colour was the dog? The dog was black. All you're doing is grabbing that information out, but you're not really analysing it. So maybe that gives us a slightly different twist about what we should be assessing, but also what we need to be teaching, because it's a higher level skill than just plopping a number into an equation and getting an answer.
And that's been the big debate, I think, over the sort of the last 50 years, has been this whole, we're talking about future now skills and future ready skills. That's been something that's been going on since 2000s. I first heard Mark Treadwell talk about that years ago in the 2000s space. He was talking about the need for transitionary skills for a modern world. So really, you reduce it down to its bare bones. It's about moving from memorization to skills and processes and understandings, really. That's what we're trying to do. And for a lot of developing countries, that's what they're trying to do in terms of the shift of education. They're trying to shift their education from a memorization base to a skill base. That's what they're trying to do. That's part of their development. And it's almost like this AI tool is coming along is going to almost in one sense force teachers to make that shift. It's not an option anymore. It's a necessity, because otherwise all of your students, if you're testing memorization and even some of those basic skills, how do I write an essay, they're going to all be coming out with A+, right? So I think that's one of the stresses at the moment for people who see this coming. And, like we were saying before, I think for a lot of us in the education sector, we're probably a little bit unaware and a bit naive of what's coming down the track. But for people who are looking at it, they are slightly freaking out. And there is that concern because they're going to be forced and they don't quite know what that looks like. So there's that uncertainty. What do you think about that? Is that going to continue to grow? Do you think as a sector we're going to, the fear is just going to keep compounding? Or do you, I know that we want to have this conversation about the opportunities and we want to kind of dive into that and look at that, but where is your sense of where the sector overall is going to go as the year starts to unfold and the ripple effects of this start to spread through teaching?
I'll jump in first if I could. So I think one of the things that has become really evident this week is that it is a tool, it is a technical tool that can go down and not be available, and it's not there for our beck and call. So we know that because everyone's using it, it's crashed, it has been unavailable, looks like it's going to go behind a paywall, looks like some companies might acquire it and build it into their tools, which is really, really interesting. So when we become quite reliant, and I'm sure that people that have jumped in and have used it over the last couple of months, like Adrian have said, have become quite reliant on it. It's almost become part of their daily usage. So that's one thing, is to say, what if the tool's not available anymore? What if it kind of goes in a different direction? How does that actually work going forward? So I think that's really clear. For me, as an educator, and I know I've spoken to my wife, who's also a secondary teacher at the moment, one of the first things she's going to do when they start back at school in a week or so is have a discussion with the kids, especially the year 12s, and not make it a secret, and actually have that first discussion to say it's there. Let's talk about it. Let's think about, set some guidelines down, some rules down. But I think when it becomes a secret, when it becomes this, I don't want to know about it, and when it doesn't become part of your discussion as an educator, that's when it could become problematic, right? Is when you don't open up the discussion and have your students in on the conversation and talking about it. Because I think for primary school, it's not so much an issue. I think the way that we do things in primary school very much is maybe a higher focus on formative assessments. We know what our children are kind of creating towards that summative phase. But I think with secondary, where we go more project-based and assignments and things, where the kind of end product is the one that gets marked, and there's not as much time to do that back and forth with drafts and so forth, that it's going to become the real issue. So I guess my takeaway would be open the discussion, certainly with your staff and principals when you go back, have a really good, robust discussion about it. Because you don't want it to be this secret that's sitting behind, because it is the most transformative tech I think I've seen in the last 10 to 15 years. So it's important to have that discussion.
I think also there's probably two aspects. There's where this is going to affect what we do in the classroom. That's probably the first bit. So in the classroom when we're doing our teaching, but also how this is going to affect our teachers' workload. So there's probably those two aspects there. So if we look at in the classroom thing, I think it can be used in a really beneficial way. Rather than, oh my goodness, this is the worst thing in the world, we've got to lock it out and ban it. Because if you think about, say, second language learning, so if I'm an ESL, a student that's English is my second language, and I'm predominantly in a school that speaks English, for me to get better at conversational English, that's really hard to do, because I've got to find someone to be able to do that. But with ChatGPT, you can actually have a typing conversation with this thing that will help you have and understand the way in which nuances work in language to be able to help you with your language skills. So I think that is a really, really good tool. And if you paired that up with reading progress inside Microsoft Teams, you've got a great experience for students to be able to increase their learning in terms of the language and their reading skills and all those kind of things, to up that standard and make it a level playing field. So it's a really good opportunity to use it for helping students get better at what they do, rather than locking it down and stopping them in that space, which is a scary space to step into, because as a teacher, you start losing a bit of control about what's actually happening inside the classroom, inside that learning for students. And I think, as Paul was saying, that drafting process is going to become more and more important, because of the fact that if you only see the piece of work at the end, and you then whack it into a plagiarizer checker, this is maybe in the high school area, you're not going to pick it up in a plagiarism checker because it's not plagiarized. So you'll need to have that process of, can I see the students' work as they're going through? Can I see evidence of them working in class? So therefore, a teacher's going to be a bit more mobile, seeing what's going on and touching base with students a bit more, so they can guarantee that that work is theirs. Now, I'm not saying not use don't use the chat to get the research and things that you need to write your essay, but then write your essay based on the back of that, or write your response on the back of that. I think that's a really good skill for students to learn as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, because there are states, like in the US, I know that there are districts in certain states that are banning it. You know, they are blacklisting it off their, routers and their internet filters and things like that. That tends to be sometimes that can be the knee-jerk reaction for educators, is to just ban it. I remember, I think what you're saying is this is the first major disruption we've had for 10 to 15 years. I think the other one that we've had recently that is on the same kind of level is this move to cloud computing, from keeping things on your server to now you can do it online, because now all of a sudden collaboration turned up. And if you look at the history of how a lot of countries, schools, teachers responded to that, was they said, well, I don't want my students using a Google Doc or a Microsoft Word doc to be able to collaborate. I'm just going to, it's pen and paper, because I want them to focus on the skill. And one of my concerns is that a lot of teachers are going to do that this will be another nail in the coffin for digital tools, because if they're stuck in this kind of memorization, skill-based reading, writing, maths kind of approach of what they want their students to achieve, they'll just say, well, we're not going to have any digital in our classrooms, and I'm going to focus them on this. Now, I'm not putting a value judgment on that, or any kind of moralistic judgment on that. I think that could be one of the outcomes, and I think it's worth thinking about as a school, like you're saying, Paul. How are we going to respond to this?
Yeah.
What's going to be our response going forward? I think that's
could,
the
Mark,
key thing.
to really foster or encourage some things that send us backwards. So when I'm thinking of banning something, let's say a school bans it, and then let's say there's a greatest emphasis on on-demand writing, exam-type setups, stuff that we know is not in the real world, but only in the education system that is behind by a fair way. But because they've banned it and they're scared of it, they'll say, right, sit down here, handwrite, you've got 20 minutes to produce something really quickly. So what they'll do is they'll look at what's out there, and then they'll design some sort of assessment that is actually worse pedagogy, that's worse for the student and worse for the outcome to actually get what they want at the end of it. So I think this can actually enhance what we do, but it also could send us backwards quite a long way if we don't embrace it or at least talk about the benefits of using it. The other thing to think about is you can ban that as much as you want in schools. Students will find a way, a little bit like Jurassic Park and the dinosaurs. They will find a way, and if they're doing most of their assessments at home, I've got kids that have just finished year 12 and are going through year 11 and 12 now. They don't do their work in class. They're doing it at home. They're doing it on weekends. They're staying up late at night. So that banning and all that thing, it's not going to work. So I think it's time to have those really good, robust discussions about where we can take this.
So let's try and drill down and focus on the positives. So as of now, like we know that there's big issues. And our leaders, I think that's something that we need to grapple with, and this will go on over a period of time. There's an evolution of us changing tech, and then the tech changing us, and so you could replace us with education as well. So that's going to be ongoing. What could teachers be doing this month, next month, the month after, to really grab this and use the opportunity for some good with their students?
So I reckon if we look at the pain points for teachers, what do they find painful? The first thing is always creating those unit plans of work, unless they've got them beforehand, especially if you're a first out teacher. You're kind of struggling to put, and you get this lesson plan, you've got to teach that lesson, your supervisor looks at it. This can help you build a structure of a lesson plan. And as Paul said before, you can link it to the AITSL or the teaching standards, and that saves you a bunch of time. You still have to refine it. You can't just take it and run with it, because sometimes it just doesn't work and oh my goodness, that's not going to work in my class. Or you use it as a template, give it a crack, and go, oh my goodness, the thing that I thought was going to take 15 minutes took me 35, so I'll just go in there and change it around. So use it as that base to help you create your lesson plans, and help you save that time so you can focus on that teaching in the classroom, but then go back and refine it. The other thing I think you could use it for in that lesson planning area is say, look, I've got to teach a lesson on, I don't know, on some sort of, let's say, a year 11 physics thing. I'm going to teach a thing on motion. Please give me 5 things I can teach my year 10 class on motion. It's got to go for 45 minutes. And please give me some YouTube videos so I can go and learn about it beforehand. Now, that gives you a resource so you can actually get it ready to roll. You can then use that as your learning spot. But if you want to be even more clever with it, which I would be thinking is that personalised learning bit, you can then personalise it for different students in your class. You can differentiate straight away and give them a separate learning task, learning journey, learning whatever in that space by using the ChatGPT to generate it for it. And they can have all the same overall experience, but it's been personalised and differentiated for each student with those resources at the bottom of it. You still need to look at those resources and make sure they're appropriate. But I think for differentiation in the classroom, it's superb. And then if you link it to a rubric or an outcome, say, and link it to this rubric for my assessment, then your assessment's going to be the same across all your students, even though the task might be slightly different for each student because of the fact that it's being differentiated for you, which takes time in real life, but you can get this to do it for you.
Time savers are important, aren't they?
I'm kind of off the back of what Paul was saying about his wife going into secondary school and talking to their kids about it. Ask your kids what they can do with it and give them a role with it, because then you've got a really good understanding of how far they can take it as well. Get them to have a go and ask the questions and see what they come up with, and and start from that, because at the end of the day, once you open it up, they're going to go and give it a go anyway. So actually finding out what they get out of it as well would be a really good opportunity for them. Then you have a really good understanding of their questioning techniques, and maybe there's some key areas there that you could work on, and yeah, see what they come up with.
In some of my reading as well, Mark, I was looking at, I just kind of thought, well, what else could you use ChatGPT for? And one of the ones that came up quite regularly was like a virtual assistant. So type in, the students can say, where on the school website do I need to look to find canteen times? And it will go through and look at your school website. It will then give you the idea to be able to find it. So you can use that as a virtual assistant to help you, for students to work their way around. But just imagine onboarding a new staff member, where do I go in the school to be able to find this? Use the school's website, do it. It'll grab that information. It'll help you out that way. So it's an interesting kind of virtual assistant / I don't need to ask everyone about this. I can actually find some of it out myself. So it'll be interesting to see how well that does that, but it could be a nice little helper for students and teachers as well.
And I think that might be something that comes further down the track, because I don't know that it is connected to the internet at the moment, because whenever I've tried to get it to do that, it sort of says, I don't have access to the internet right now. So that, yeah, that's definitely down the track, I think.
Yeah. I think the other thing too to realise is that this is coming from a primary teacher's heart and soul here, is looking at beyond the text as well. So obviously it's a dialogue and it's a chat, so it involves text, but it also spits out emojis. So as a primary teacher, let's say that I'm a learning support teacher and we're doing a book study on Harry Potter, and my students are really struggling with the text, but they're going through it and we're discussing it. You can ask ChatGPT to spit out 50 emojis in sequential order of the plot of Harry Potter, and then use that as a visual stimulus and scaffold that for your students to make sense of what those emojis are and have those discussions. And so you could create a great little work activity around what are the emojis in order here and how does it correlate with the plot line of the book. And so I think for me, the magic of ChatGPT is going to be in the creative ideas that teachers come up with to use and the students. That's the gold ticket. And to be honest, that's been the way in ed tech for the last 10, 15 years, right? The teachers, the innovators, are the ones that look at creative and effective uses of the tech, not just using how it's been used before. It's almost like we're all pioneers, right? We're always coming up with new ideas. And I think teachers kind of undersell themselves as pioneers quite a lot because they're coming up with new ideas all the time.
So if I'm a teacher looking at this and I haven't heard anything about it, I don't know where to go, where would you go to have a trial, create an account, have a little play around before you get back into things with your teachers, students? Or if you've got students tomorrow, where would you go to get that started?
I'll jump in first really quickly. I'd simply have a play first. So my thing would be, if you can get on it, because we know that it's been down recently, jump in and have a play yourself, because I would say that as soon as you put in that first response, you've got the, oh wow, I can see what everyone's talking about here. So if you don't actually type in a question or a prompt, you're not going to get that and see it authentically. So that would be my first point, is have a play. We can put the link to it there, but if you just Google ChatGPT, it'll come up there. You can sign in so that it records your dialogue conversations, a little bit like, hey, I met with Bex the other day, and this is almost like what we talked about in this kind of subsection, which is really, really nice. But my first advice would be, before you open up, you never open up new tech in front of the kids and explore. Have a play yourself first, just so that you're comfortable with it. And you've got a basic knowledge before you talk to your kids about it.
That's really cool. So, I mean, for me, I keep on coming back to that time-saving thing, because when you talk to teachers at the end of term 2 or term 3, they'll always say, oh my goodness, I'm so time poor, I'm just under the pump. So I'd be looking at it to see where I can save time. So that might be, and even writing some generalised reports for students. What do you hate about teaching? I just don't like writing reports at the end of the term. Well, throw your data in there, get it to write a report for you. Use that as a report bank that then you can customise and edit and use again, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I have asked it to grade an English essay, and it does it really well. It tells you the things that they've done really well, the strength, where it's fallen down. And if you say specifically look for grammar and sentences and references to, as a Romeo and Juliet essay, it will then tell you where those references were done properly and whether it was done accurately as well. So that would save a bit of time. But once again, you've still got to go look back and look at it again. So I think it's a really good way of being able to save those things. But as Beck said, I'd get the kids to give it a crack, talk to the students about this, say, look, this is what's here. How can we use this better for you? What do you think you can use it for to make your learning better? And how can I help you use this the best way you can so that you learn better in my classroom? And I think that's where that personalised learning is going to come in.
And that's the conversation that you can be having, right? Because it's a broader conversation about technology and the best case uses of it. So whether it's students spending far too much time on TikTok, or whether they're using AI to generate art that's not really theirs, and then they're using it for means where they're going to make a monetary gain. There's lots of conversations about the ethical use of technology that I think this just is a really good topical thing to grab. It's front of news at the moment, and a lot of people are talking about it. Use it as an option to have those conversations with these students. So yeah, great way to start whatever it is that you're doing in your classroom with the students, for sure.
And it'll be interesting to see where it gets to, like where it morphs to, what happens next, and what gets value added to it, because you see what, say, like Apple, Microsoft and Google's, what are they doing to value add to this space as well? So it'll be interesting to see what comes off the back of it. Microsoft's got a really cool thing coming out with language, so you know how you get something to read it to you, and it's very monotone because it's that kind of voice that they've recorded. If you now speak to it, it picks up all your intonations, and then when your text is read back to you, it takes those intonations and makes it real. So it sounds like a real person reading to you. So that's going to be live in a little bit. That's really cool. So just imagine that being paired with this. That brings up a really good opportunity for that kind of nearly a conversation with someone who doesn't exist.
If we go into the entertainment tonight part of this segment, we look at what's happening and the gossip, things that might not be true. Definitely lots of reports at the moment about Microsoft acquiring that for $10 billion. So that's the big news at the moment, that they can build into their Microsoft toolset in regard to Excel and Word. So lots of talk about that. I'm pretty sure Microsoft were some of the early adopters and investors, and they've already invested a lot of money, along with Elon Musk and some other people, in regard to OpenAI, which is the company. So that's the kind of talk too, is where does the paywall start? And it's already started now. If you've been on recently, you'll notice that you might have got a request to join the Pro account, which will give you free access when the server is down or when it's not working. You get free access with no wait periods. So there's always going to be a monetization of this. We need, if we want good tools to be working well, there's a whole team behind it. You can imagine the team behind this at the moment that needs to be employed and paid and all that sort of thing. So it's really interesting now to see the companies that might leverage that from a platform and from their market share point of view, and how some of the other platforms might scramble in regard to kind of bring out something similar, or investing at least in that sort of tech.
And I kind of wonder also where, I mean, this, while we're doing the Saturday Night Live, or whatever show we're on at the moment, the ethical side of it. So you're getting responses that have been written in a certain way, especially when you have a conversation. But what cultural and ethical background is being used to generate those responses? And that would be a great thing for a philosophy class or an ethical class at the higher level in education to kick around. You know, who's making these decisions to give you those responses? Are we getting responses from a developed third world AI, or are we having it from a developing country point of view? So it's really interesting the way in which those responses are given, and that would be a really good thing to dig into as well, which we haven't got time to today, but I'd like to explore how that is being used, and therefore how your thought processes are being not controlled, but kind of barriered in by the responses that you get from this AI. So it's a very interesting world to be in, or interesting space to be in.
It doesn't have
kind of like a TARDIS, isn't it? As soon as you take a little look inside, it just gets bigger and bigger, and all the questions just get huger and huger.
Yeah.
So maybe to wrap up, if everybody just think of what's one key takeaway that a teacher could take, maybe whether it's something for themselves or something that they can use to share with their staff, or as a leader with your team, what would be one thing that you'd take away from this conversation?
For me, it would be...
Jump in. Give it a go.
Yeah, jump in. Yeah. I'm with you, Bex.
Yeah.
Jump in, have a go, and talk about it with staff. For me, try to set up some frameworks when you introduce it to your staff, because I think sometimes frameworks and parameters for your discussion are really good. So I know that when I used to hold staff meetings, it was, I'm going to introduce this tool, but I need to set some guidelines here. We're not going to be judgmental. We're not going to bring our own emotions to it. We're going to critically analyze and see what it does well, and what impact it'll have on our students. So sometimes in staff meetings, we know this as teachers, we can get over emotional about bringing our own history to the table and a whole range of different things that we end the meeting with not knowing what we spoke about or what actionables there are. So I think for me is bring it to a staff meeting, introduce it, get excited about what it can do, but then just critically analyze it, go through a little plus minus interesting or whatever you might want to do about it, to get people to look at it instead of just making a judgment based on something that maybe is not the best judgment to hold it on. So that would be my advice.
I would absolutely do that at a teacher only day. Like, what a great team building activity as well. Like, who can come up with the coolest thing, like bring this to a teacher only day, giving it an hour for all staff. They could collaborate together. They could go on one-on-one. Like, how cool would that be, coming up with, who can bring back something crazy or cool or wow, and being able to share it. So it'd be a great teacher only day activity.
I would really be looking at that personalised learning and differentiation in the classroom, because I think we talk about it a lot, but it's very hard to do sometimes in class. And this could give us a really good way of being able to create tasks, assignments, whatever for our students to be able to create their own learning journey within the parameters that we set. And I think that would be a really good way to even get the students to, you might be doing something in, say, food tech, which we call it over here in Australia. So they've got to bake a cake and just say, look, these are the ingredients you've got. Come up with a recipe that you need to prepare and do within a 45-minute lesson, and you've got to meet these outcomes. Each student can come up with an individual learning plan based on what they want to do, uses the ingredients that you've already ordered into the school. Every kid's doing something slightly different, but within a framework. You've got an assessment tool there, and they own the learning. And I think for me, that would be a really super cool place to start in using it to actually enhance the learning outcomes for students.
So cool. Well, if you're watching and you'd like to know anything more, don't ask us, because we're still learning and we're asking questions as well. So I think, in all of the work that we're doing with schools and working with teachers in classrooms, I think we're going to see this evolving over time, and it's going to be really interesting to see as month goes by what happens with acquisitions and whether there's a paywall and all of the different types of technologies that start to be combined, so that this isn't just an AI tool that's using words, but it's actually using visuals. It could be using webcams. There's talk about it using AI in the human behavior space and voice as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. I think my biggest takeaway is just being open, and like Paul was saying, being open to the possibilities, looking at things objectively, looking at the things that we might need to be concerned about, but then also looking for the opportunities as well. And I think it's a really good opportunity for people to continue having this conversation as we go forward. So thanks, everybody. Great to have you on the call. And we'll see you with the next huge adjustment and innovation that's coming out with ChatGPT.